Hi, good morning. My name is Joe Harper. We are talking today about export licenses. Welcome to Star USA training. Today's June 9th, and we're talking about specifically exceptions for export licenses. Please know that you are all currently muted. Chat function is available if you have any questions. I'll periodically jump over and check it so that you can ask as we go. Star USA is a trade and compliance firm. We do a lot of consulting, advice, training, and we also offer direct services, audit, HTS classification, ECCN, license submission, service provider oversight, etc. My name is Joe Harper. I'm one of the principals at Star USA, and I'm a licensed customs broker. And I'm very excited. We have a new customs broker prep course starting at the end of July. It's one of my favorite things that we do, and it's about training customs brokers to take the exam and also be excellent brokers. As always, if you need support outside of the webinar, please contact us via train@starusa.org, or you can reach out via the website or phone if you have any of our direct lines. So today we're talking about export licenses. This is part of our export compliance and control series. If there's other segments on it, and you can find those on the website. So I'm assuming in this training that whatever you are exporting falls under the jurisdiction of the Export Administration Regulations, or the EAR, which is under commerce, instead of under the International Traffic in Arms Regulations under state, DDTC, etc. So we're also talking specifically about license exceptions and not the process of applying for a license. That's what we're hitting today. We have other trainings on applying for a license, or if you're interested, you can reach out to us. So in order to get to the point where you need a license exception, you kind of have to assume that your item needs a license. And another thing to remember under this is that an export is a shipment or even transmission of an item out of the US. So that can be a product, that can be software, technology, or information. And it doesn't even necessarily have to leave the United States. It can just go to the brain of someone who is not a US citizen. That's always kind of a tricky thing. So you start when you're working with the Export Administration Regulations. One of the key places that you should know is the Commerce Control List. And that has all items that are subject to the licensing authority of the Export Administration Regulations. It does not cover military items that are on the United States munitions list, and it doesn't cover certain other elements, but very few. That's where you find your export control classification number, or ECCN. You're going to hear ECCN talked about a lot if you ever work in exporting. And the Commerce Control List identifies items by specific characteristics. It has 10 categories. Category 0 is nuclear materials, facilities, and equipment. Category 1 is materials, chemicals, microorganisms, and toxins. 2 is materials processing. That's where you find your machine tools, your lathes, etc. 3 is electronics, systems, equipment, and components. 4 is computers, but beware, because a lot of computers that you use every day wouldn't go in category 4. Instead, you would find them under category 5, part 2, which covers information security. And category 5, part 1 covers telecommunications. 6 is sensors and lasers. 7 is navigation and avionics. 8 is marine, and 9 is aerospace and propulsion. Now, if you've ever gone to the BIS website and looked at the CCL, you know that. But sometimes it's good to read through them again and be reminded how many things are on there. Now, if something is not specifically itemized on the CCL, but it is subject to the Export Administration regs, like a huge majority of items are, then it's classified as EAR 99, also referred to as EAR 99 or many other things. EAR 99 items usually consist of low-tech consumer goods, and they don't require a license in many situations. But if you plan to export an EAR 99 item to an embargoed country, to an end user of concern, or in support of a prohibited end use, then you may be required to get a license. So don't look at EAR 99 and automatically assume doesn't need a license. That's a mistake that a lot of people make. The Commerce Control List is in Part 774 of the EAR, which is also 15 CFR, or the Code of Federal Regulations, and it's Supplement 1 to that. That's the best way to find it. If you go online to the Code of Federal Regs and find Part 774 to 15 CFR, that's where it's most often updated, because items change on the CCL all the time. So another word of caution is don't download the Commerce Control List at the beginning of the year and never update it, because they do change. So when you're on the CCL, you're going to see reasons for control under each of the ECCNs as you go through. And there are several reasons for control. These are talked about in more detail in Part 738 of the EAR. And these are anti-terrorism, chemical and biological, crime control, chemical weapons, encryption items, firearms convention, missile technology, national security, nuclear proliferation, regional stability, short supply, UN embargo, significant items, or surreptitious listening. So I know you have eyes and you can read those, but I'm reading them out loud because they're important to know and kind of have heard once in your life, all of them read out loud. All right, so here's some sample ECCNs so you see an example of what that looks like. So you have 3A101, which is electronic equipment, devices, parts, and components, those not controlled by 3A001. And then underneath all of this, there's a list of items that are controlled, and they're very specific requirements. And it's controlled for missile technology and anti-terrorism. And it tells you there which specific column on the country chart to reference. And then it also tells you which list-based license exceptions you may get. And I'll talk more about that later. Then there's 2B351 over on the right, which covers toxic gas monitors and monitoring systems, their parts and components that are not controlled by 1A004C. And then underneath, there's more items controlled. And it's controlled for chemical and biological and anti-terror. So you go in, you find your item, it's controlled. Do you need a license? So in order to determine whether you need a license, you need to know your product and the ECCN. You need to know where it's going. You need to know who is going to get it after it gets there and how they'll use it. So figuring out whether or not you need authorization to export, because that's what an export license is determined by the ECCN first, and then all of the people who are going to use it, where they're using it, how they're using it. Most commercial exports don't need a license, but the first step in checking is you get the classification. And I'm not going to walk you through how to do that today. We have other webinars on that. But 3 quick ways to go through it are one of the best ways to do it is go to the source and ask the manufacturer, because they know their product the best. Then you can classify it yourself using the Commerce Control List, or you can get an official classification via BIS, and you do that by requesting a commodity classification through SNAP-R or Snapper. It's the Simplified Network Application Process. And those classifications from BIS are also known as CCATs, which are the Commodity Classification Automated Tracking System. And you need to know if the country it's going is sanctioned, if the end user is sanctioned, if they're a denied party or they're prohibited, and if the end use is subject to higher controls. So the first hurdle is the country of destination. So, and you use the Commerce Country Chart, which is published by BIS and updated regularly, to figure that out. And that country chart is found in the Export Administration Regulations, which are again in 15 CFR, and that's in Part 738. So our examples from a couple slides ago, I think there were 2B351 and 3A101, had MT column 1, AT column 1, and CB column 2. So for item 1, which we're saying is a digital converter, that an analog to digital converter that can be used in missiles, it meets the requirements of 3A101. A license is required for any of those countries. Missile tech is almost always licensed. For item 2, a toxic gas monitor controlled by 2B351, a license is required for any of these countries that have an X in column CB2, and AT1 doesn't impact it at all. So a license would be required to Nicaragua, Niger, Nigeria, Oman, Pakistan, Palau, Panama, Papua New Guinea, Paraguay, Peru. If there's an X in the box on the Commerce Country Chart under one of the columns that's identified under your ECCN, that means you either need a license or you need a license exception. No X means no license is needed for the item. It doesn't mean no license is needed for the end user or the destination. So that's kind of where you can get tripped up, is you have multiple things that you have to clear as you're going through this. So there's different kinds of licenses. There's the individual validated license, and that's the license that's applied for using SNAP-R. You put in a lot of information about you, your business, your customer, your relationship with the customer, the product, the end use of the product, etc. And you have to swear to BIS, to the government agency that you're getting the license through, because sometimes it's not just BIS, that you are going to make sure that the item is used for good purposes. It takes a few weeks up to a few months to pass through and get back, and it's limited to specific items, that specific customer, and certain values. So you can apply, if you know you're going to have recurring sales throughout the year to one customer, you can apply for an amount that's going to be that whole year's worth of value. Or if it's just a one-off, you apply for the amount of the shipment that you're exporting at the time. Then there's license exceptions, which are covered in 740. And there's two in there. There's list-based, which are very item or ECCN specific, and there's only a few of those, and they usually say yes or no under the ECCN. We saw a couple slides back that some of them said NA next to them. And then there's transaction-based, and those cover the facts surrounding transactions, and we'll go through the exceptions in more detail coming up. And then there's no license required. Those are the great ones. That's when there's no X in the box and it's going to an end user that passes all the screenings, or it's EAR 99 and that the country of destination isn't embargoed, and the end user passes all screenings. Those are great. You just put no license required on your item. One other word of caution, if your item is under the amount required for an EEI filing, which is $2,500, I think. My brain just quit working. It's $2,500. So if your item is under that amount, but it requires a license, you still need to get a license and file an EEI and report that license. So don't think that just because it's smaller value, it is not licensable. So this is a great chart that Department of Commerce puts out. It's a wonderful flow chart, and you go through asking if your item is subject, if it needs a license. So you start by identifying if your item is subject to the EAR, and if it's not, get out of the EAR, go to ITAR or wherever it needs to go. If it is, then you classify it, finding an ECCN. If it isn't a specific ECCN, you go over to EAR 99. And then you go through the X in the box on the Commerce Country Chart like we just did. But then the next step is to look at general prohibitions 4 through 10. And you also want to, if it does not have general prohibitions 4 through 10, then you go through no license required. If it does, you have to apply for an export license. If it's under a specific ECCN and there's a license exception available and they don't have prohibitions 4 through 10, you export using the license exception. So you either need a license, no license required, or a license exception. But this flowchart's great because it tick all the boxes. The only thing it doesn't ask is about the end user. But you should know that because you should be screening your end user at the very beginning of your transaction. And if they're denied, just don't even proceed with the paperwork. Don't waste your people's time. All right, so let's look at some license exceptions. A license exception is an authorization that allows you to export, re-export, or transfer items that are subject to the regulations that would otherwise require a specific license. You have to meet the specific conditions. Most of the time, they don't need you to get anything from BIS. Most of the time, you just say, hey, I'm claiming this, and you itemize that on your elements, on your documents. Make sure you have really good record keeping. Exceptions are found again in Part 740 of the EAR, and they are a 3-letter symbol, and you have to put that on your export documentation for clearance purposes. Otherwise, your carrier won't let it get on their modes of transport. They definitely shouldn't. So there's some license exceptions that are country specific. Country specific lists are found in Supplement 1 to Part 740. Group A are regime members. Group B are those that are less restricted. It's a huge list of countries. Group D are countries of concern, and then Group E are terrorist supporting countries. And there's only a few of those, which is great. All right, so this is the slide that you're gonna wanna take some notes on. So this is the list of license exceptions and where they are found in the EAR. Because if you're using one of these, you want to go directly to the EAR and make sure that you have met all of those requirements. So we're gonna start with the list-based license exceptions. So the first one of those is GBS, which is in 740.4. It's the second one down. And that just stands for Group B shipments. And that is only for items that are controlled for national security. If they're controlled for other reasons, they can't qualify for GBS. And there are reporting requirements under this for certain exports. So this is one of those requirements that I'm telling you, make sure you pay attention to. The next one is CIV. It's right down there. And again, it's for national security controls only. This is for if on the country chart, there's an X in the box for national security under your country that you're going to. You cannot use CIV if it's going to find a military end use. And you can use it for country group D1. Now, word of caution, BIS is retiring the CIV license. Licenses will be required for national security controlled items on the CCL to countries of national security concern effective June 29th. So if you have something exporting in the next 20 days, you can use that license exception. Otherwise, don't bother getting it in your memory. Then there's limited value shipments, or LVS, which is 740.3. And that is specified on the ECCN. It'll say either NA if you can't use it, or a dollar amount next to it. So it'll say, for example, LVS, yes, $5,000, or LVS, $1,500. So anything under that amount, you can use LVS as a license exception. It only applies for those in country group B and for single orders. Don't use it if you're going to split your shipment, especially if you're going to split your shipment to get under that dollar amount. They really don't like it. Then the last list-based exception is TSR, which is in 740.6, and that's technology and software restricted. This is for country group B, and it's those that are technology controlled for national security, and it requires prior written assurance. Now that prior written assurance is one of those that you write a letter with your end user assuring the government that you are going to use it well, that you have no evil intentions. So those four, the top four that we just talked about, those are list-based license exceptions. And I know I've said that about 4 times, but those are the ones that you're going to see on the CCL under a specific ECCN. I just use so many acronyms. Hopefully you know what I mean. If you don't, feel free to ask questions. So they're tied to the actual item and its specific ECCN. So all the ones under here are transaction-based, and some of the transaction-based are also on the CCL, but usually they're there as with a note that says you can't use them for this specific ECCN. So for example, under some you'll see STA restricted from being used for these items. So TMP, which is in 740.9, is for temporary imports, exports, and re-exports. It's things like tools of the trade or kits that have replacement parts, things that are being exported for demo or exhibit, items that are being calibrated abroad and then will be brought back. And all of those must be returned, consumed, or destroyed within 1 year. So it's kind of like a temporary import under bond if you're on the import side. But you have a 1 year limit. So it's great if you're shipping out a machine that's controlled and it's just getting repaired at its manufacturer or a specific repair site and coming right back. But if you're not able to get it back in a year, you're going to run into some hurdles to negotiate. Then there's RPL, which is servicing and replacement of parts and equipment. And that's a 1-for-1 for immediate repair of defective or unacceptable parts or equipment. So it's replacement parts only for items that were legally exported. So say you exported, we were just talking about 3A101. It was an analog to digital converter, and a little tiny part in that broke, and you had exported it with a license, and now you're shipping out a replacement part. You might be able to use RPL. Maybe not though, because that's missile tech. So you would want to closely read your requirements. It doesn't work for anything that's improving the design, capability, or performance, and replacement items need to be returned or destroyed. So the part that it's replacing has to not be usable. Then there's ENC, and that's down in 740.17, and it covers encryption items. So these are exports, re-exports, or transports in country of encryption items that are classified under 5A002, 5B002, 5D002, and or 5E002. And these might need prior BIS review. Then there is BAG, which covers baggage under 740.14, and that's for personal and household effects in vehicles, things that are not for sale. They have to be owned by the exporter, and there are special provisions for unaccompanied baggage, shotguns and shells, body armor, and encryption items. There are all sorts of other ones. I'm just talking about the ones that are most commonly used. Notice that there's things for humanitarian donations, there's aircraft, vessels, and spacecraft, there's agricultural commodities, consumer communications device, support for the Cuban people, etc. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but the ones that I just talked about are the ones that are commonly used and that you should probably be aware exist. So when you're qualifying for an exception, you need to verify who's involved. Do they have any proliferation activities? And that covers nuclear stuff. And have they passed restricted party or sanctioned screenings against the BIS and OFAC listings? If they have results come back against them and you can't clear those results, you're going to need to either pass on the transaction or include that to BIS in your license request. Are there any red flags in your transaction? Do they have any suspicious activities that you discover when you search the company on Google? Ask questions, directly ask stuff about their end use. And if it doesn't make sense, like you're shipping a bakery that missile tech thing or a whole ton of bearings, ask some more questions and take them internally and use your compliance people to say, hey, this seems weird. One of the biggest things that government agencies want you to do is not self-blind. Ask questions. If something weird is coming up, look at it directly and use good judgment, use reasonable care, use due diligence. There are embargoed or sanctioned countries. These 5 are ones that are either fully embargoed or that have terrorist supporting tendencies according to our government. So that's Iran, Cuba, Syria, Sudan, and North Korea. Those are ones that you're going to be very hard pressed to do any business with. I forgot to mention at the beginning that we will send out slides, and I also forgot to mention that sitting through this webinar can get you CCS or CES credit. So if you just email us train@starusa.org your CCS or CES number, we'd be happy to give you credit for that. So feel free to do that now or at the end of the slides. And we will send out the slides. And I believe Melissa also has some good handouts that we'll go through in the resources as well. So when you're looking at an item that requires a license and you're trying to see if you can use that exception, ask if the item is subject to the general that would prohibit them. So the general prohibitions are in the EAR, Part 736.2, and there's 10 of them. So they're on the next slide. I was hoping I wouldn't have to say them all from memory. All right. So these are export and re-export of controlled items to listed countries, re-export and export from abroad of foreign-made items with more than de minimis controlled U.S. content. So these are things that you should not do, right? Foreign-produced direct product of technology and software, those can't go to group D1, E1, or E2. And those country groups are in the EAR. I think they might be one of the handouts that's coming too. You can't export to those with denial orders. You can't export or re-export to prohibited end uses or end users. You can't export to embargoed destinations. You cannot export to anyone who's known to participate in proliferation activities, whether the government knows that they do that or you accidentally find out that they do that. If you ever run across something like that, immediately escalate to your compliance people, and then that's something that BIS would want to know about. There can't be unloading in transit, which makes sense. And so that applies to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Cambodia, Cuba, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Mongolia, North Korea, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. Those are areas that can't have unloading in transit. There, you can't violate any order, terms, or conditions. And if you proceed with a transaction with the knowledge of a violation, they like to rain down hellfire, and that's not much appreciated. I was thinking about saying more about end users, but I think we've said everything. So this is another of BIS's export control decision tree. It's supplement number 1 to part 732. If it's not subject, you get out of there, etc. So with your transactions, don't spend time looking through the exceptions if you don't need a license. All of this is really dense. I do have to give BIS credit because I think that they are the government agency that is best at writing in layperson and communicating well, especially in their regulations. But it's still a lot to parse through, especially on the Commerce Control List, because they use terms that if you're not in the industry, you're not going to understand and know right off the bat. So once you've classified your item and looked at the Commerce Control chart and screened your people, if you don't need a license, don't spend a bunch of time digging through exceptions. Also go through any specific restrictions on a license. If it says to Group B, make sure your country is on the Group B list. Look under your ECCN to make sure that it doesn't specify that it can't apply there, etc. And every single exception is unique. And sometimes the exceptions are different. The same exception can be different depending on the ECCN. So anytime you use an exception, open up your CFR, make sure that you're looking at the criteria with fresh eyes and that you meet them. And then always, always check restrictions, see if there's reasons of control that don't allow it, see if there's ECCNs or a specific item that doesn't allow you to use that exception, and verify your users. You cannot use a license exception when the authorization for that is suspended or revoked, if the export is subject to a general prohibition, if it's surreptitious interception as the reason for control, if it's a crime control item going to most destinations. Most missile tech won't allow you to use license exceptions, and almost all embargoed destinations will not allow it as well. All right, so let's run through a really quick example of this. So you're shipping some fluorinated silicone lubricant that has kinematic viscosity that's less than 5,000 centistokes at 298 degrees K. You're shipping $2,500 worth of it, and it's going to Brazil. Let's make this fun and say you're shipping $2,300. So even though you don't need an EEI, you may need a license depending on what the country chart shows. So it's controlled for NS column 2 and AT column 1. So you're going to Brazil, so you'd pull up your country chart. AT column 1 doesn't have anything, so I didn't even bother putting a box. But this is one of my favorite ways to look at the country chart with the highlighting across, because it makes it really easy to dial right in. So you see that Brazil has an X in national security column 2. So on the surface of it, this requires a license. But it showed limited value shipment as a list-based license exception is available for shipments $3,000 or under. Yours, remember, is $2,300. Now, limited value, you have to make sure that it's in country group B. So you would check, and Brazil is on country group B list. You would also want to check who it's going to and what their end use is. And you would need to get in writing what their end use is. This is one of those situations where I would get them to give you the information that's almost a BIS 711. In fact, you could just go ahead and get a BIS 711 as part of your record keeping. And then you would want to put LVS as part of your EEI filing or your bills of lading. So you wouldn't have to get an EEI filed if it's $2,300 and you're using an exception, but you would want to have it noted on all your paperwork. So these are some of the most helpful tools. BIS website is great. You can find phone numbers for people at BIS who are happy to talk to you about this stuff. They have a lot of decision trees and flow charts and video trainings and daytime webinars, etc. Then there's the Commerce Control List. I don't believe we printed that and sent it because I want you to remember that it changes all of the time and you can't just expect it to stay the same. So you should go to the Commerce Control List freshly each time you're classifying. That is Supplement 1 to Part 774 of the EAR, which is found in 15 CFR. Then Supplement 1 to Part 740, you'll also want the country chart as well. So I'm gonna see if you guys have any questions or comments. And yes, this is being recorded, so you can view the recording at any time if you'd like. Do you guys have any questions? I'm going to pause on this slide for a minute. Again, you can get CCS or CES credits, so just email that to us, and the slides and recording will be sent out later along with a bunch of other tools. So feel free to send any questions that you have, and I'm going to stop the recording so that you can ask them without embarrassment.